Now we're going to turn it back to Tracy for more information about Form Designer in regards to FastFlow.
Thanks, Aaron. So today I'm going to show you some tips for a FastFlow form. Hang on just a second. And let me get this FastFlow form up here for you. Okay. So one of the benefits of FastFlow is you can take a paper form and scan it, and the software automatically detects the fields that should be fillable. Of course, you can also scan in the electronic documents like Word and PDF. This form is an example of a simple purchase order request. You can see the yellow fields that are going to be fillable. But there's a few improvements that we can make to this form as well. So, for example, the first thing we'll do is make the state a drop-down box. Rather than typing in the name of the state or an abbreviation, the user will simply choose it from a drop-down. So, in order to do that, you want to right-click on the yellow fill field, choose the object definition, choose the filling tab, click Enable Autofill, and click the Autofill Wizard button. If you want to create your own autofill list, you can do that. You would go with this first option to create or edit the autofill of the current field. But for this example, the software does have a few auto-saved pre-filled lists that you can use. So we're going to choose Apply a Saved Autofill List to the current field. And from the drop-down, we're going to choose the U.S. states abbreviated. Click Finish, and then click OK. And then make sure you save your document. To view the fillable form at this point, you can use the Form Filler tool. Just a minute while I find that tool. Here it is. Okay, and so if you click on the state field now, that you can see that you have the drop-down options available. And then to get back to designing the form, you click on the Form Designer tool. The next thing we're going to do is add a few basic calculations. For this example, we're going to make the quantity multiply the cost and give a subtotal. First, open the Calculations tool. This opens the toolbar. Click on the subtotal until you have this field highlighted. Then click inside the Calculations toolbar to start your calculation. Click on Quantity, and you can see it being added here. Put an asterisk here to multiply the cost, then click on Cost. And then click on the green check mark to save your calculation. To add the calculation to the other subtotal fields, click on the next subtotal field and click Auto. This is going to automatically put the calculation that you need into this field, and then you just click OK. So you're going to continue doing that down all of your subtotal fields, which I've already done. And that will allow us to put in a calculation to get the grand total. So when you have all those applied, click on the grand total. Click on the Function button, and go to the Math drop-down, and you want to choose the sum. You click Paste and Close. Then you want to select all of your subtotal fields. To do that, you just click and hold and drag through all of them. And you can see that they were added to your calculation up here. Then you just click the green check mark button to save that calculation. And you can also use the form filler tool to check your calculations if you'd like. And finally, if you want to limit a user to checking only one checkbox, you can group the checkboxes. To group the checkboxes, you want to select them all and right-click and choose. Try that again. Select the checkboxes, right-click and choose Object Definition. And then you want to give your checkbox grouping a name. And say OK. And then click Yes. And don't forget to save your document. And then at this point, you can go to the form filler, answer yes to this question, say OK. And you can see that now you can only choose one checkbox. You can also check your calculations here and make sure that they're working properly. When your form is complete and you're ready to go, go back to the designing document, go to File, and select as, or I'm sorry, save as FastFlow form. Give it whatever name you have and save it. At this point, then your FastFlow document is ready to be uploaded. And that completes my part of the demonstration. We'll go to Ron, who can show you more about FastFlow.
Thanks, Tracy. Like she said, we're going to go to Ron Davis, who will talk a little more about FastFlow. Ron, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, and I will make you the presenter and let you take it from there.
All right. Make sure I get the right screen here. Is that sharing successfully?
We can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Tracy, and all the previous consultants in the demonstrations. I think it's doing well getting that points across. So I wanted to talk about FastFlow and CM and some tips and tricks and things that we're doing with some current projects and some of the things we have as new features and such. And so if I go too fast, feel free to ask questions or whatnot through the chat log, and we'll answer those after the session. So I'm going to kind of dive right in here. I've got a couple things to show, a little demonstration, and then I'll talk about some features. So one of the things we're doing a lot of is sort of taking what Tracy just did in her form and expanding that into various calculations to do various things that people need. So one of the things we found is we sometimes need to get a name off of a bigger field. So we'll need to get the first initial of a vendor, for example, or the first initial of a person who's in the name field, for example. And so we've got a calculation that's been working really well for that. And so I have that up on the screen. And we're going to show how these different ones are being used. And so one of them, we use the vendor name or part of their name, their initial, many times in the workflow name, so that as it goes through the process, we know based on the workflow name that it's for this particular vendor. So, so that's what's happening there. Then the other one is we found that sometimes the PDFs, when they get stored out, are having the date field not being populated successfully after it's stored as a PDF. And so this is a way to capture that PDF, capture that date, from our pre-fill as opposed to being a calculation on the form itself. So we're basically pre-filling a field called date time and then using date time calculation to put the real time, the real date into the date of today's date on the form. And Aaron, my headset's beeping, so hopefully I don't get cut off here. I've been on the phone almost all morning. And the next one, set a workflow name based on multiple fields. So this comes back to setting up that workflow name, and this is not an example using the name of the vendor, but we'll put the date, maybe the initiator's department code, and then a value we call sequence ID, which is the sequence ID of a particular calculation, of a particular form being launched. So when we launch forms, we've been plugging in sequence IDs, which is a unique identifier for that particular launched workflow. These are just a couple examples of common calculations we're doing. I kind of show how we're doing that, and Tracy showed some calculations a little bit ago. Basically, it's this calculation. We plug it into that calculation field, and it helps us project the right value into the right field. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a second, too. Hidden fields. Along the same lines as calculations, we have hidden fields that we're using to manage the routing very discreetly through the process. And I'll be able to demonstrate a couple of these in the demonstration piece. Set value is what we use to name the workflow. Date time, again, I talked about a second ago. Purchase power is sort of a new one. We've had several organizations request that this person has allowed to purchase up to $1,000, and this person's allowed to purchase up to $2,500 or sign off on invoices up to those amounts. And so we're plugging that in as a value for that particular person in their profile as a custom field. Manager 1 is also another way of doing a similar thing by routing to a very discrete manager. So we'll put their ID in that manager 1 field, or their second level manager into their second level into the manager 2 field. So we can route based on that information very discreetly to that individual. I mentioned sequence ID a minute ago. It's the ability to have a unique number for that particular workflow in that particular form, so that you can always refer back to it everywhere in our software. Initiator fields is another set of fields that we're using to move data through the workflow based on what's stored on the form. And we've sort of standardized them along these names as we've been building out new projects, but initiator, username, first name, last name, role, department code, location, purchase power. They're fields that we pre-fill with the person who launched the workflow, and we can use that information later on in the workflow for various things as needed by particular requirements. And the way we handle hidden fields up here is really by defining in the object appearance in Designer that we never display that field. So it's on the form, and we can use it in FastFlow, but it doesn't get displayed to the users of the form. It's just tracked behind the scenes. I've also seen these fields end up in the data storage section. So we might be just tracking a piece of information so that it lands in data storage properly, so they can use that to look up linked data from other databases, sort of a BI indicator. So you might want to get a particular code to line up properly, and we'll get that code, but it'll be hidden. It'll just be behind the scenes until it gets to data storage, and somebody doing reporting would use that code for something. Another use of that is archiving names. So we need to archive a specific index value for like a form ID or a form number or a department code, a GL code, various things like that. We'll store those in there as hidden values, let them land in the database or let them land in the archive file name so that they can be used for other purposes. And we'll talk about Visual Route Designer. I think previous people on the call have probably talked about Route Designer a few times over the course of the user group session today and yesterday. But Visual Route Designer is an awesome enhancement to the old routing programs. But really what I'm going to talk to here is how we're using calculations to do the routing, or conditions is maybe a better way to put it, to do the routing. So I've got a workflow that I'll demonstrate in a little bit that uses similar conditions as what you see on purchase power. In this case, I'll demonstrate it's $1,000. So if the thing I'm buying is less than $1,000, I can sign off on it automatically. If it's not, then I'm going to ask for that indirect manager to sign it. And I'm not sure if I'm still on audio or not.
We can still hear you.
You can still hear me? Okay, because it stopped beeping, so I'm not sure. All right, sorry. If I go off, somehow signal me, Aaron. I'll figure out another way to get on.
Okay.
So the first one is I'm going to route to an indirect manager, and what I call an indirect manager is somebody who I put in that man1 field. That's a person's ID who may not be my direct department manager in my department, but they have signing authority over something that I might do. In this case, it's maybe under $2,500. Then I might have a VP who is going to cover everything else up to $5,000. And then I've got another scenario where I might have to just identify if the form's been signed yet. If it's not been signed yet, then this person needs to sign it. So that might be another director. It might be a VP. It's hard to tell. I've got it set up to be my actual department head in the software. So when I show you the route, and I can move over to that for a second. And it looks like it signed me out here. Yeah. Hold on one second. And I'm going to come back to the designer piece in just a
second. Are you still there? Looks like his audio might have gone out. I'm going to ask Philip to message him and see if he can switch to another way of dialing in. I think what you're seeing here is some of the robust functionality that goes beyond the simple and intuitive nature of the visual workflow designer and some of the other features. You can go deeper into the functionality and do even more with it. And if you're interested in exploring more of those features, as we've been talking about, connect with us. We want to learn about the things that you're looking to do and how you're looking to even further improve your processes. We'd like to help you with that. Another good use for the health check that we've been talking about, or you can reach out once again at formfast.com/contact.
All right, hopefully I'm back on.
You're back on.
Well, I'm glad that went pretty quick. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, I'm not sure where I got cut off there, and so maybe
it was right whenever you started showing the some of the route type variables and some of the more in-depth functionality of this view.
So okay, so basically here I'll just kind of start from where I left off in this view. So I'm an initiator who has the ability to buy things up to $1,000. So my purchase power is $1,000. If my invoice total is greater, then I'm not going to be allowed to sign for it. It's going to have to be signed by somebody else. So the person in my, what I call man1 ID field would be that person, and then that's the next step, and his value is greater than my purchase power, but less than $2,500, and so on down the line. So I'm using my actual department head inside the software to be the next person, and then my profile has, again, my VP assigned to it, and that's really going to fall through to him. So if none of these other pieces allow a signature on the form, then this person's going to end up signing it by default. So that's how the workflow is designed. But I want to jump back actually to the designer for a second to kind of catch up. I skipped over. I was going to go from the designer slide into designer, and I skipped over doing that. So so in designer, I wanted to touch on this field. So today's date is the one I showed in the actual slide deck, where they've got a formula here for calculating today's date based off of a pre-filled date time field. So this is date time. In my software, I'm going to pre-fill that, and I'm going to show you that in just a second how that works. But I've also, all those other hidden fields I mentioned, they all, in our templates and our designs of new projects, are all falling down here sort of at the bottom of the form. We put them at the bottom, kind of just get them out of the way of visually designing the form. But they also are generally, you don't want anything in tab order on them. You don't want anything to go to them. They're really strictly hidden from any user's view. They're only used in the background of the form. Also wanted to point out, and the reasoning for showing you the signature workflow the way it is, because this form, in this way it's designed, is only allowing for one signature. So kind of the intent of the design is, I only need the person who has the authority to buy this item at this cost to sign it. I don't care who initiated it. I don't need anybody in between. I just need somebody who has authority to buy this amount to sign the form. So it may or may not be everybody's use case, but that's the one that we're demonstrating at the moment. So, and also this set value, I kind of want to point out, I've got it called set value, set val, and it's a calculation of any number of fields that you need to use to represent your workflow name. And so based on the form, we may want to represent it by the vendor, we may represent it by that sequence ID, the initiator's name, the initiator's department, anything like that. What we found is it's usually more than one field, and so that's why we've used a calculation like this to generate that kind of a thing. So coming back to the software now, I'm going to show how does that work. So let me get out of this page I'm on. And in our document template, so in documents we've uploaded this already, so you can see I've uploaded it once, and I use a convention of versioning, so my date with a ABC kind of a convention to tell me I've uploaded. Now I can tell I've uploaded 3 versions of this form on this day, so in my testing and processes of getting it set up for the demonstration today. But in the set fields, which is, if you're familiar with FastFlow, that's where we define what value of our form we want to be in the name of the form. So when I launch these, as a user initiates these, it's going to use this value to incorporate the naming convention of the workflows as they continue through the system. And then pre-fill, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of other things we can talk about here, but I want to get to the points of the tips. So I'm using pre-fill of my columns of my profile. So the USD indicates it's a profile of my user who's initiating the form. It's one of the custom fields that I generated, and that field contains a username, and I'm putting that username into the man 1 ID on the form, man 2 ID on the form, purchase power on the form, date time on the form. So I'm just kind of moving user profile information that the system knows about me when I start the form onto the form so it can be used throughout the rest of the workflow. I'm also asking for this user to choose a department that they're doing this for. So I've actually got a search key set up on here. I'm going to prompt them and say, select a department that this is going to be used for, and I'm going to plug that department into the background of the form. So in this case, the form doesn't visually, if you remember, it doesn't visually indicate department on here, but for tracking reasons, as a requirement of the end result of the form, we want to know what department initiated that, regardless of the individual user. So we're asking them to prompt them for their department. All right, so let me show you my user for a second, because I'm going to re-log in as a different user to demonstrate this. And I'm not going to go through every use case scenario to demonstrate all those conditions, but I want you to know those conditions exist in the workflow to do this. So but the way these are set up, and not everybody's done this before, so creating a custom field is not terribly hard to do in the administration area, but once the custom user setting is there, it's available on each user's profile. So in this case, I put in some user IDs as my team lead and my facility department head, and I put in my purchase power as $1,000. So that all translates onto the form and then gets used by the workflow. So let's log out. And Aaron, I don't know if you have a time frame crunch or if I'm good to go at the moment, so you stop me if you need to stop.
We're at the top of the hour, but we can go just a few more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free.
I got maybe 3 more minutes, I think, on this part. So I'm going to start this as one of my end users to demonstrate the process. So right here is where it's going to say search select your department for this purchase. And so I happen to know I've got a couple departments in here that work with this scenario. They both start with CM. And so I'm going to say search my departments for that. And then I'm going to pick the one I want. So I'm going to, in the background, if you noticed in that pre-fill screen I had up a minute ago, I had the group name, which is the department name, and the group ID, which becomes the department code in the translation. So when I hit select here, it basically plugs those 2 values into those hidden fields on the form for me. Get this up here, and so I'm not going to go through the whole process of entering all this data for time's sake, but my fingers are do the walking for me here. I think I've got actually too many browser windows open, so it's taking a few minutes for it to catch up. And that's that. So then, wow, what's going on? Come on, slow down. You can see I can check all my checkboxes if I want. I know Tracy demonstrated that in the viewer. You can see that they turn on and off like they're supposed to. I can turn on this checkbox if I want to. And all that data will get stored in data storage if I want it to. You can see the drop down. I can choose the one I want from that list. I can go from the field, so and type in M, and see that it does sort, you know, it does pull up the ones for Missouri. So that's kind of a cool, useful drop-down feature to do that. So when I save that, it's going to bring me up and ask me, and so I normally would probably hit save there because I'm going to have attachments probably to add to a purchase order. I'm going to probably want to be adding a quote or some other justifying information to this order request, but then I'm going to approve it. And then it's going to ask, because it's actually less than my $1,000 signing power, it should prompt me right back up to sign it. And looks like I didn't quite get that condition right in there because it didn't show up in my list, but it went to my manager. Yeah, so it went on to my manager. Not sure how I had mistaked that up, but at the end of the day, that's where it went. So, okay, let's send one more minute back in Workflow Designer, not as this person, but as my admin user. Talk to the prefill, so we're going to jump back in here one more second. As you can tell, I've got a lot of forms that we're working with in our environment to help people do things. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on for feature enhancements. So one is the ability to have notes out here. In case you weren't familiar with the notes capability, it's kind of nice to be able to say this is what's happening in this step. There's a lot of other enhancements happening with the step in Designer here for naming conventions and for organizational structure. A person can just move a step by doing that, where in the past you had to go through about 5 different checkboxes to be able to move a step. You can move over signatures just like that. It's pretty simple. You can send an email back to the initiator of a request by just creating a step action for that. You can search step actions. So one of the things that happens, and you can see in my list here, I've got email to these different people. So if I'm looking for email to my supervisor, I can just type in super and see that I get the email to the supervisor, and I can just drag that one over to my disposition, easily finding. So it's kind of nice to have that searching capability. That's a pretty new feature in the software. One of the other things that that's really cool for working with people outside of your workflow environment. So if you're going to take this to a stakeholder and say, you know, what's changed, you can. I like to expand all these so you can see the conditions that are in them. But you can hit print route, and if you're on a machine that has, say, PDF writer or even just a simple printer, you can send that directly out to a printer. It'll look a lot like this, and you can do markup on it to say what is it what needs to change, and then you can come back into your software and make those changes appropriately. And then one other thing that I want to touch on is in our administration panel, our newest version of the software has a pretty slick capability of, if you have a test environment that you're building these in and a production environment that you're working in live, there's ability to migrate out a lot of the configuration that's built within the software through our migration tab. So you can build a backup process. It creates a package file. You export that out. You come back into that live system and do an import restore, and it pulls over everything related to that particular workflow into that new environment. So the idea is you're pulling something out of test, putting it into live, for example, or just moving it from one workstation to another. Also, it's kind of nice just to say, let's back this up. You know, take this whole package and back it up to some file directory structure in case I ever need to restore it on the FastFlow environment if it crashed. So this is a huge new win for the application for those kind of features. So there's probably more I could have covered, Aaron, but that's how far I got.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron. And thanks to the rest of our team for sharing the new features, tips and tricks. Tracy, JC, Kyle, and Ron, thanks to you all.